If you like this video, remember to support the channel on Patreon. Link in the—
Hold it, Buster.
What's the big idea? That lady paid me a lot of money to do this ad read.
Nuh-uh. She paid Sonic to do the reading. And that's moi.
Oh, brother, not this again. You two are forgetting. You're not even the focus of this video. I'm the one who should be doing the ad read.
You? Don't you got a Pizza Hut to bug or something?
Silence, Santiago.
Don't call me that.
To be fair, your shade of blue is wrong.
Say what? I'm
Clearly,
blue
this is
as
supposed to be
all
my
natural.
To finish this announcement, if you'd like to support this channel, the proper links are in the description below.
Robotnik!
I'd better get out of here. Until we meet again, Hedgehog!
What defines a legend? It has a few definitions, the simplest being very well known. There's also an extremely famous or notorious person. But often, when people discuss legends, they're discussing people or stories that have been held in high regard for years, beloved by many with their memories passed down across generations. See what I did there?
That was awful.
Oh, shut up! But what I want to ask you is a question. How do you revive a legend? Just think on that as you watch the rest of this, and we'll get back to that. So, unpopular opinion time. I like Shadow the Hedgehog. Now you might be thinking, that's not an unpopular opinion. He's one of the most popular characters in the entire franchise. But when I say that I like Shadow the Hedgehog, I don't just mean the character, although he is my favorite character in the Sonic series. When I say that, I also mean the 2005 video game of the same name, i.e. the one that almost everyone seems to agree is quote-unquote one of the worst Sonic games ever made. And while yes, I acknowledge that it is far from perfect, I often feel like its good qualities are either undersold or just aren't acknowledged at all. Shadow himself, in my opinion at least, feels really nice to control in this game, and while the gunplay could be more fleshed out to have more mechanical depth, as it's kind of undercooked in the game as is, the idea isn't bad in theory. You know, adding combat to the gameplay without slowing down the pace of levels. A problem many platformers with dedicated combat struggle with, such as Vex or the Legend of Spyro series. Now, the funny part is, there are other things in Shadow that slow down the pace of that game, but my point with this statement is that it's not the fault of the guns. In fact, I actually think the guns were probably designed the way they were in order to make sure that you didn't interrupt the flow of levels, which is kind of funny to think about if that's the case. I also think, even if the way it's presented is a bit of a mess in the eyes of many, the game's writing is honestly pretty meaningful for Shadow as a character. This is a Shadow post-amnesia, and he's looking to essentially fill the hole inside himself, to know who he is. And by the end, he not only knows exactly who he is, but who he needs to be. He's even able to finally move on, no longer shackled down by his past in any sense. And moving forward with it, as shown to us in the infamous Sonic 06 via Shadow story in that game. I've actually been meaning to make a video on Shadow 05 for like a while now, mainly to talk about why I really like it in spite of its reputation and many faults. Hell, up until 2024, I genuinely considered it my favorite Sonic game, period, despite it technically not being a Sonic game, and also not being the best game in that series anyway. I say up until 2024 because the most unexpected thing happened. Sonic X Shadow Generations came out, and originally I had like no plans to buy it, mainly because I just don't like Sonic Generations. I'm just not a fan. But my love for Shadow is stronger than my hate for Sonic Generations. Besides, someone else bought it for me, so at that point I had no reason not to play it. If it wasn't for Felicia, you know who you are, I wanted to play this game. So I promptly installed the game upon release and ignored the Sonic half of it to dive headfirst into only the Shadow half. And let me tell you, I was blown away by how much I fucking love Shadow Generations. I want to preface this all by saying that I'm playing the PC version via Steam. I have not played the game on any other platform, and I probably never will. And I'd also like to quickly spotlight 3 mods, given I have the PC version, and I would suggest that if you're going to play the game, you should use them. The first one is not necessary in a technical sense, but is necessary in a aesthetic sense. Nu Metal inspired Shadow by Amano something, because the drip goes hard. The second mod is also not technically necessary, but I think it enhances the experience. Sleeping with Sirens tracks by, I am so sorry, Das Novovich, as essentially it gives you Sleeping with Sirens tracks, including Don't Let the Party Die as the final boss theme, which is kind of crucial to me personally, because that song kind of became the unofficial theme of this game thanks to the internet hype cycle. And finally, and this mod is the only one here that I would say is required installation if you play this game, Uncensored Rouge by Banana Boy. This last one is, in my opinion, like I said, required to install, as the move to make the back of Rouge's outfit rest higher on her back is fucking stupid. It makes no sense with her wings. That's why the back was low. It's not just because she's hot. I also guess I should note this, since I just talked about mods, that I played through the main story without mods and only started installing them after my initial playthrough. And none of the mods I play with affect gameplay anyway, so I guess that wouldn't matter one way or the other, but I thought I'd put that disclaimer out there. So with all that said, let's start with the gameplay. The game feels great to play. One thing I really like is having the boost command on the right trigger. It's way more comfortable than having it on X or square, in my opinion, and I hope this becomes the new default moving forward. Or, if nothing else, the games start having a consistent trend of always letting you remap the button so I can immediately switch it to this in future Sonic games. I imagine saying that is going to cause some division in the comments, and honestly, that's whatever. I feel like no matter what I say, it's going to cause some division. This is a Sonic video, after all. And besides, the right trigger for boost is just way more natural for me, so I'm going to like that change. Another thing to note is the quick step, which is still in this game, but doesn't really feel needed. For the first time ever in regards to a boost-style 3D Sonic game, I didn't feel like I needed the quick step to move myself left and right. I actually felt pretty in control of Shadow the whole way through, and that sense of control is good. And it's something I haven't felt in a game in this series in a while. Unleashed, for as good as it is, for example, is not an easy game to control because of the rapid speeds that Sonic is constantly going through during the daytime sections. And don't get me started on Forces not even having a fucking drift button. Shadow's other moves in addition to the base moveset of a Sonic game actually add a lot to the overall package for me. Chaos Spear, Chaos Dash, as well as Chaos Control all add extra layers to not just the gameplay, but also how the levels are designed. They're built around this more packed toolkit, and thus there's an extra layer of depth to them that I enjoy. There's even a good gaggle of alternate paths to take, and even some strats have been found by players for speedrunning that take advantage of moves like the Chaos Spear. The new Doom powers help as well. Doom Spears can be used by holding down the Chaos Spear button, in my case Y, and lock onto targets before all firing upon releasing the button. This means positioning is key to use this move effectively, as where you are upon using it does have an effect on what is targeted and thus how much mileage you can even get out of a single use. If you're too close or too far, it won't work as effectively, especially with multiple targets. It's a perfect example of a skill that, as you continue to play, you begin to master it and you can make the most of it as a tool in your arsenal. Doom Surf activates automatically in water, and it's the reason Shadow can't just run over water in this game, which doesn't bother me personally. And there's also Doom Morph, which allows Shadow to traverse purple sludge when active. It's activated by homing into a morph ball. No, not that one. And it'll turn Shadow into Le Creature and allow him to sail across the sludge like it's no big deal. It also allows you to latch on the morph balls in midair as long as the transformation is active, which you can use to either swing from them to really feel like Spider-Man, or even just shoot yourself directly upward by letting go of the button when the swing arc has you directly under the ball, which is your swing point. You can also kind of just shoot yourself at any point by doing this at any point during the arc, but it's most effective if you do it under it to shoot upward. The Doom Wings are also a cool new addition, as well as the last Doom move Shadow unlocks. When you reach at least 50 rings, you hit L1 and R1 to pop out Shadow's cool new wings. The game teases it early in one level, but you don't unlock it until near the end, which is neat. When the wings are active, you lose rings, thus it's a good idea to not go too long without collecting more while using them. Also worth noting that your glide is your boost, so you'll fall if the boost gauge runs out. No flying over the whole level Kirby style for you. This is a move, like any other, that is meant to help your traversal rather than trivialize it. It's also this game's equivalent of Supersonic. Doom Blast is activated by holding X then hitting X again. This move has Shadow lunge forward at Black Arms enemies, and then you can launch them far away, using them to also send yourself over to wherever they go. It's not just a combat move, but also a technique that can be utilized for traversal. This aspect of Shadow's toolkit, how everything he has not only is used for combat, but also played into traversal elements as well, to make the flow natural and never slow down the action while still adding variety to the gameplay, was something that I felt was sorely missing from Frontiers. Frontiers didn't naturally blend combat into platforming, instead choosing to divorce the two halves of that game into what felt like two different undercooked games, which just made that game unsatisfying to play as a whole. Shadow Gens doesn't have this problem, because Shadow Gens feels like one coherent game, and nothing in its design feels out of place. I feel like with a platformer like Shadow Generations, melding the combat into the platforming rather than treating it like separate parts of the game is the best approach. I enjoy Shadow 05, obviously, but even I can't deny that Shadow Gens making its combat more like obstacles within the obstacle course that is its level design is just the right way to go about things. Helps that the combat, while not overly rich in mechanics or tools, still is effective enough to feel satisfying and clicks perfectly into place with the rest of the gameplay loop. Like my buddy Lane once said, simple mechanics with multitudinous applications make for the finest game design recipe, and that's something I'd say Shadow Generations does pretty damn fucking well. I felt like Sonic Frontiers, a game I just bounced off of and did not enjoy, didn't really work for me because the overworld and combat stuff and the platforming speed sections felt like two different undercooked games stapled together. It does make me appreciate Shadow Gens more for being a much more coherent title in terms of design. Now, to be fair, it's not an exceptionally long game to finish the story of, but much like a Devil May Cry game, it isn't meant to be exceptionally long. It's meant to be played over and over, each run through a level making you just a little bit better, increasing your rank until you eventually hit that S rank, and even after that, you can still try and beat your best time. Find new routes, take full advantage of Shadow's kit, and do everything possible to try and just shave seconds off of your time. It's a lot of fun in practice, and it's the first time any game in the Sonic series has made me care about getting S ranks or even just getting better times. And that's because this game is just fun to play on its own, and thus I feel motivated to keep playing and get better. It really does remind me of what's so fun about replaying Devil May Cry games again and again. But then again, that makes sense when you remember that the original Devil May Cry's gameplay was inspired by Kamiya's experiences in arcades, and Sonic, at its core, is a pretty arcadey series in terms of gameplay. This game made levels from a certain 2016 Sonic game, which is infamous for having the dullest and least enjoyable level design for the series, fun. That is a miracle if you ask me. Within levels, there are also these collectible coins, 3 per act, and they're essentially keys that let you open the chests scattered across the hub world, which means that yes, there is a hub world, and it doesn't feel out of place, surprisingly. It essentially acts as a connecting area between levels, as well as a hub for a good majority of the actual story to take place. Something I'll go into more detail on when we get there. This hub area does call to the minds of many a similar area from Bowser's Fury, and I could make that same comparison, but I never played Bowser's Fury, so that comparison is hilariously just lost on me, actually. I dig this hub quite a bit, though. Not just for the added bits of storytelling it adds to the narrative, which I promise I'll get to. In a minute! I promise. But also the hub's cool because it's just actually kind of fun to explore and look around. But it isn't too big that it becomes a hassle to go from level to level, as once you have a completed hub, it's pretty easy to get from one gate to another no problem. And it doesn't take too much time to do so either. The most annoying part of the hub is trying to find those nuts and bolts for discount scratch and grounder. That's the only time the hub world gets annoying because some of those bolts are really, really well hidden. And anyway, if you still find it a bit of a hassle to traverse the hub world to get from level to level when you're, going back to get all S ranks and beat your best times, you can always just go to the game's menu and select the stage that way, which is what I started doing in the post game anyway, because at a certain point, you're just trying to get the S ranks, and you're not really going to be too fucked to rerun to every single gate, and I imagine many people will do the same thing. During the course of the game's main story, you'll be playing through the levels as well as challenge acts to gather boss keys that you can then use to open up the boss gates, which, upon defeating that boss, progress the game even further. Also, as you progress the story, you'll gain Doom Gears, which is how Shadow progressively gains those Doom powers that I talked about earlier. Now that I'm saying that out loud, I probably could have used this as the segue to talk about them, but we're already this far in and I'm not rewriting it, so let's just keep moving. There are 6 stages in the main game. We know there's going to be at least a 7th stage through DLC at some point based on the 3rd Sonic movie. But that's irrelevant to this video, as the movie isn't out as of the time of me writing this script and me recording this video. It might be out by the time this video drops, but I don't know. The 6 stages are mostly all callbacks to games Shadow featured in. I say mostly for a reason that'll make sense soon. We have the Space Colony arc, which is mainly known for its appearance in SA2, but it did also feature in 2005 Shadow the Hedgehog, which is the first level of this game. Next is Rail Canyon from Sonic Heroes, which hit so different, I'm not gonna lie. You have no idea how familiar and nostalgic this shit is for me. And hey, this time it's actually fun to play through. Kingdom Valley from Sonic 06 is the 3rd stage of the game. And for the 4th stage, we've got Sunset Heights from Sonic 4. Sorry, I gagged a little there. Let's try that again. Sonic 4. I'm sorry. Sonic Forces. Okay, that wasn't so. Oh, I thought I could make it through there without vomiting. Okay. Okay, I'm back. Anyway, Chaos Islands from Sonic Frontiers is the 5th stage, and this one bugs the shit out of me, actually. Now, you're probably wondering why this bothers me. Is it because I don't like Frontiers? No, that's not why. It bugs me because Shadow isn't in Frontiers. Like at all. So like, why is it here as a level in his side of the game? And I know that the real life reason is because Frontiers is a recent game and they wanted to give it a level in their new release. But why not just, I don't know, add a new Frontiers theme level to the Sonic half of the game? And then let this slot be taken by a stage from a game Shadow was actually in? This wouldn't bother me nearly as much, although it would still bother me some, if there was any level in this game that was distinctly from Shadow 05, like Westopolis, as opposed to where we are right now, where the only 05 level is one that's also from SA2, and was probably meant to represent SA2 more than it was Shadow 05, because let's not pretend here, Space Colony Arc is 100% meant to be an SA2 level first, and a Shadow 05 level second. I'm not even bothered by there being 2 SA2 stages, since not only was that Shadow's debut game, and thus is really important to him, but Radical Highway's inclusion is used pretty smartly in terms of narrative. You see, Radical Highway isn't just the final stage, done before the final boss, but also a place Black Doom consistently keeps throwing Shadow into during the events of the game and other levels. And this is where we start talking about the story. I know, you guys are really waiting for this bit. If you are long-time subscribers to the channel, the story parts are the parts y'all probably look forward to the most. Black Doom's end goal is to turn Shadow into his weapon, his tool, and to do that he's trying to push him into going back to when he was at his most rageful, i.e. back in SA2 and specifically during the Radical Highway stage where he was just destroying anything and everything that stood in his way. Black Doom wants Shadow to be that guy again, to be that angry, revenge-fueled killer. And like, yeah, the memes about Black Doom just being a really big fan of Radical Highway are funny, but this decision is also just pretty cool from a story perspective. It's storytelling told through the gameplay, and the fact this happens multiple times before the game even reveals outright that Black Doom's overall goal here is to consume Shadow and take him over makes it a cool bit of foreshadowing. But yeah, in case it's not already clear, Shadow Generations takes place during the events of Sonic Generations. Here, we're being shown Shadow's story, what he's doing, and it even adds a little context as to why Shadow would even fight Sonic in this circumstance, as well as to why he's not present at Sonic's birthday either. There's also the Dark Beginnings animated miniseries, which was released before the game was, and is essentially a prologue. I only bring it up to emphasize a major theme of the game's story, the theme of the game that stuck out to me the most, in fact. As Shadow's flying away in the ship, he starts to think back to Maria, to his sister, and we see him begin to almost hyperventilate as he realizes what he's doing, until eventually he shuts it out, saying out loud to himself that that life is behind him, it's gone, and he knows that he can't trap himself in the past. This is the lesson he learned during the events of Shadow 05. He can't be trapped in an obsession with the past, and he's taken it very far at this point in the sense that he thinks he isn't allowed to reminisce or even linger too long on any memory. Otherwise, he's afraid of falling back into his old habits, and thus undoing all of his progress. I'm not going to dive too deeply into Dark Beginnings, but I will say it's worth a full watch on your own time, especially if you enjoy the character of Shadow. I just bring up this part as to emphasize that Shadow's main issue at this point is that he is seemingly unable to allow himself to even remember the good memories. A scene perfectly accented by Without You, a song made for the animation that still hasn't been released on its own somehow! So naturally, a story that forces Shadow to relive and reconsider his past memories is just filled with potential. And while I don't think the execution is perfect for reasons I'll get into in a bit, it's the best writing this series has had in literal years. My biggest gripe regarding the story is just how short it is. The game's main runtime on average is barely 6 hours just for the main story. And while I will stand by my opinion that it's way better than Sonic Generations in this regard, and all regards as well, but we don't have time to unpack all that, I will admit it could have benefited from having a bit of a longer runtime to better flesh out that story. I think what's here is great, really great, and I'll get into that a bit more in a moment, especially with the fact that as the story goes on, you can talk to the NPCs in the overworld, like Rouge the sexy hot awooga bat, Big the cat, and even Maria and Gerald too. Oh, you can also talk to Discount Scratch and Grounder if you want, but they only care about their stupid Jimmy Neutron-ass rocket. There's this really good dialogue from Rouge at one point, where she notes Shadow hanging out with Maria and Gerald again, addressing how he's worked so hard to put his past behind him, only for it to now stare him down directly. But what's important is her advice, for him to cherish this time with them that he's been given now, but to not forget that he's moved on. There's a balance that Rouge is advising here, that he should be able to cherish these people he's lost, but to remember that he can't get lost in that past and get so lost in it that he forgets he has to move forward. That idea that we can remember what's come before, hold on to those memories, and cherish them without letting them consume us. She even points out he's not the same Shadow he was 50 years ago, showing that she's noticed just how much he's grown since that time. Now naturally, she hasn't known him for all those 50 years, but she's known him for about as long as we, the audience, have. I'm glad this is something you're less likely to miss compared to some of the other overworld dialogues from NPCs that you could miss. As it's the dialogue Rouge says in the post-game if you talk to her in the hub world. Stuff like this is nice and really adds to the story, provided you're actually curious and talk to the people in the hub world as the story progresses. That said, I'm not a fool, and I know that a lot of people are going to miss optional dialogues like this. And when you mix that with how little we get in the way of cutscenes, it's a tad disappointing just how little of this great story takes up the runtime. I know that might sound silly, considering that the focus of Sonic games is typically the gameplay for a lot of people, and the gameplay is excellent and miraculously the best we've seen from the series in a good while. Sorry for that joke, by the way. Writing miraculous fanfiction at the same time I'm writing this script will do that to me. Now with this said, gameplay alone isn't what drew me into the series, and it certainly isn't gameplay that made me fall in love with Shadow as a character. Shadow Generations cutscenes only make up about 39 minutes of its overall runtime, which isn't exactly a small number of minutes, but it still isn't as long as other entries in the series that are often praised for their stories, like Unleashed or Black Knight. What's funny is the difference isn't even that big, because what I'm asking for isn't for Shadow Generations to be like one of the Square Enix RPGs that I love so much and play constantly with their multi-hour long cutscene compilations. Even though I'm 100% on board with that idea, like genuinely I would love for like a Sonic RPG on the level of those games to actually exist. But what I'm asking for here is just a little more out of Shadow Gens, so when you put all its cutscenes together, it's a bit closer to Black Knight or Unleashed in length. Because what is here is amazing, and I want more of that. I love the story of Shadow trying his best to move on, but doing so by essentially not allowing himself to look back at his past, only for his past to look back at him. And this is where I get to why I asked that question at the start. Remember that question I told you would come back later? Shadow the Hedgehog, the character, is exceptionally popular. People fell in love with him back when he was introduced in SA2, and they saw his story of a lab experiment reawoken, seeking revenge for the loss of those he saw as family, being brought back to the light by a voice that spoke to a latent goodness in his heart. That same goodness that motivated his revenge in the first place. Which sounds strange to say, but it is true. His desire to avenge Maria, his family, came from the emotion of love. Even in his darkest days, he wasn't evil. That is why, when reminded of his promise, he's willing to put his life on the line to help Sonic defeat the Bio-Lizard and save the planet. In Sonic Heroes, where his role is much smaller than it was in SA2, he is found by Rouge the sexy hot Awooga Awooga Bat, and he's being guarded by Omega. They become a team and the rest is history, as fans know. But the story also introduces Shadow's amnesia and plants the seed of concern in Rouge's head that this Shadow may not even be the same one that she knew before. Then there's Shadow 05, which, even if its presentation of its story wasn't perfect, its narrative is about Shadow trying to find himself, to discover who he was, and more importantly, who he is going to be. Ending with the true ending of the game, capping off with Shadow defeating Devil Doom and figuring out who he truly is. Shadow saying goodbye Shadow the Hedgehog was him saying goodbye to his past and who he once was, deciding from this point forward he'll move on and no longer be weighed down by his past, the pain he's been through, and the mistakes he's made. We saw him post this decision in Sonic 06, where Shadow's story is easily the best part of that game. And now here we have Shadow Generations, which calls into question Shadow's method of moving on by thrusting his past upon him. Each boss in the game emphasizing this point: the Bio-Lizard, Metal Sonic, Mephiles, and of course Black Doom in his various forms. The Bio-Lizard was the original Ultimate Life form before Shadow, essentially acting as an ancestor of sorts and a reminder of his origin as a lab creation. Metal Sonic is more of a metatextual example, as he's the original evil Sonic from the games prior to Shadow. So Shadow fighting him is kind of like Shadow going to head with a dark reflection of what he once was and what he could have been. Mephiles literally took Shadow's physical form, a literal dark reflection as opposed to Metal's metaphorical one. Mephiles' personal story in this encounter of fighting for his right to exist only for Shadow to essentially force him down into non-existence is depressing, but it's symbolic to Shadow pushing down the monster inside him that Black Doom is trying to break loose. I think there's a reason he's the last boss before Black Doom's. Shadow doesn't even recognize Mephiles, as he, like basically everyone in the canon, does not remember the events of Sonic 06. And then of course, the final boss of the game is Black Doom in his multiple forms. The most literal representation of Shadow's origins and everything he's trying to avoid being. What Black Doom is and what Black Doom wants Shadow to be is a monster. An evil being who exists only to destroy and commit violence with no regard for who or what gets hurt as long as its goal is reached. The exact kind of person Shadow was once during the Radical Highway section of SA2, and like I said, that's why Black Doom keeps throwing Shadow onto Radical Highway. He wants Shadow to go back to that mindset, back to being just like him. He wants to get Shadow to awaken the demon in him, to become a monster. The game is taking Shadow and beating him down with reminders of his past. The very thing he thought he had moved on from after the events of Shadow 05. But no, his past is looking him down once again, waking up from inside of his being. But to Shadow, so much of his past is just pain and regret and loss. Every step he took on Radical Highway was just another mistake to him. But that's not what Shadow is. He's not a violent monster. He's not one step closer to the edge of villainy. He's not all these things Black Doom wants him to be. No, what Black Doom needs him to be. Maria protests the idea of Shadow giving into his anger, his rage, and insists that he exists for good, even explaining that the name she gave him is meant to symbolize that. And in a way, it kind of symbolizes Shadow's personal story. On the surface, he may appear dark and even evil to some sense, but in reality, he's good. Because when in darkness, a shadow always points you in the direction of the light. That's why Maria named him Shadow. It's who he is. Not a bringer of darkness, but a beacon of light. But that said, Maria being here, after accepting that he'd never see her again, that he had lost her once and for all, it's completely confusing what is real for him. It's why Rouge says what she does in the dialogue that I mentioned earlier. He needs a reminder, and we see that at the end of the story when, after defeating Devil Doom, Maria and Gerald start being sent back to their time, and Shadow tries to stop it. to live forever in this moment in time eternally. But it's Maria that insists he let things be as they need to be, to let time march forward. I've seen some takes about this game's story and how it invalidates or contradicts his development from 05 and 06, but no, actually, I'd say it couldn't exist without them. As I explained earlier, 05 was Shadow rediscovering his past and eventually determining who he was going to choose to be, with 06 showing us him post the declaration at the end of that game. Dark Beginnings showed us that part of Shadow's decision included him thinking that he had to completely push away his past, including the good parts of it. That's not a healthy way to move on. Just as how living in the past constantly is not a way to live, refusing to ever look behind you is also not a way to live. There's a balance to it, of being able to look back at your past and what you've been through to learn and grow, and moving forward without getting so stuck looking back that you forget to ever look ahead of you. In my opinion, that's what Shadow Generations is ultimately trying to say. Shadow has to cherish the time he's gotten to have with people like Maria, the people he's lost, and not dwell on the fact that they're lost. Shadow has to cherish the time he's gotten to have with people like Maria, but not dwell on what he's lost. Not getting so obsessed that he finds himself pulling a Zane and living in the past to escape the present. His time with Maria and Gerald is an important part of his story, one he can and should be able to look back at and learn from, and even cherish. I think that's why Maria tells Shadow, when explaining why he can't stop her disappearing from happening, that his friends need him. She's not just stating a fact, but saying that he needs to remember the now. She also points out that they'll always be connected, as she's always in his heart, which to me emphasizes my point about how he can carry on those memories instead of trying to force himself not to think about them in some vain attempt to move on. Hell, maybe there's something to the fact he says he'll stop Rouge in regards to her getting the Chaos Emerald to Sonic so that he can defeat the Time Eater. Friends of his present that he would have to stop to save the friends of his past. Shadow Generations' main strength, other than its immaculate gameplay and level design, is its story, and what that story is trying to say. It's why I wish there was just a little bit more of it to really make it something even more. Because what's here is wonderful and actually gives me hope for the future of my favorite Sonic character. And that's why this video is titled like it is, because to me, Shadow Generations revived a legend. After 06, I felt like portrayals of Shadow in Sonic media weren't exactly the best. Things like Sonic Boom turning him into an insult to all hedgehog kind, the Metal Virus arc of the IDW comics fumbling his characterization so bad I dropped them entirely, and him just becoming a background element in games he was just included in, like the original Generations, as well as just not being in a lot of games like Frontiers or Lost World. I don't think he's got to be in every game, but the fact that when he was in games after 06, his inclusion never really felt meaningful until now. But now, in the year of Shadow, I saw a game highlight Shadow's story and touch on why I and others love him so much. And yeah, it wasn't perfect and it has room to be improved upon, but for what I wanted, it was exactly what I needed. And to see this character that, to me, is a symbol of perseverance and internal strength in the face of a struggle for solace and a battle for one's identity be done justice in a game like this, it's great. And that, in the end, is how you revive a legend. By remembering what made it a legend in the first place. Until next time.